This is Coach Garver. This is a new video I did for the fall, starting in the fall of 2024. I did it over the summer, and I think it's a really important video. So in these series, you just watch inferred improvement opportunities, right? And so what we talk about in that video, we're going to kind of expand upon it and maybe take it in a slightly different way. So in inferred improvement, we're looking at attribute importance, and we're looking at attribute performance, more specifically performance ratios. We take those two data points that we've already looked at, we kind of combine them together in importance performance analysis, also known as quadrant analysis, also known as IPA for importance performance analysis. And we showed you the quadrants of major strengths, major weaknesses, all that stuff. And we talk about how we use that to identify kind of continuous improvement opportunities. What should we fix first? Well, last year when we did this, in the past when we did this, and to be honest, it mirrored exactly what I did as a consultant. As a consultant, I'd get to this point in my presentation, and I had importance performance analysis, IPA, and I had another graph that was called the delta chart, or it was a combo chart that it was kind of a different take on combining attribute importance and performance. Both were really good, and I use them as consultants, and whatever I use as a consultant is what we do in this class. I'm working on research, right? So I do research on CX, and I'm doing research this summer on importance performance analysis. And there's kind of a new technique. It's been around, but I just did a pretty major study on IPA, and diagonal line IPA is a new recommendation that I'm writing in this research article. And if I went back into consulting today, I would do like the original IPA, and I would also do a diagonal line IPA, and probably do away with the combo chart. And so because I feel that's what I would do in my consulting business, that's what we're going to do in this class. And so this is going to give you, this video is going to give you some insight into why diagonal line IPA is a really good complement to the original IPA. And then really quickly and easily, how do you do it and how do you interpret it? So let's go get them. So you guys know me, I love presentations then, and I really like the design of this one, the slide here, but because it's diagonal line IPA, I kind of dig this one too, because you're going to see some diagonal lines going that way. Now, mine won't be crooked like this, they'll be more straight diagonal lines, but anyhow, you know, you got to entertain yourself a little bit in life, and that's my entertainment for Garver himself today. So let's keep moving. All right. So the IPA results from the last video were right here. We got importance on the vertical axis. We got performance ratios on the horizontal. And we put some crosshairs in there, and we get these four quadrants, right? Focus here because it's really important and we're not doing well. And keep up the good work, keep it up. It's because it's really important and we are doing really well. And possible overkill is because we're performing well and it's just not that important. And low priority meaning, hey, we kind of suck at it, but it's not that important, right? But the bottom line is we focus here, high importance, low performance. Those are our major weaknesses. Now, in the original article that came out describing IPA, these were the phrases that they use, so a lot of people still use them. I prefer these, right? I prefer major weakness, major strength, minor weakness. I think it ties into language that we use in strategy much better, right? When you think of SWOT analysis, strengths and weaknesses, and this really kind of puts a little extra spin on that. I think that's a really good thing. So I tend to, if there was one set of language that I was going to show you, would be major and minor strengths and weaknesses, just like this. But the rest of the world will also use those other phrases, so I want you to be aware of them. There. So what are the benefits of the standard approach to IPA? Well, one, it's easy. It's easy to communicate. It's easy for the audience to understand and understand classifications. And because it's easy for them to understand, it's easy for them to take action. And that's one of the clear benefits. It's just, hey, that's a major weakness, fix it. Got it. I'm going to go fix it, right? And major benefit is just easy communication, easy understanding, easy to take action. All right, here's another one. And when I first was becoming a consultant and I was working with executive teams, I tied in IPA, Importance Performance Analysis, with SWOT analysis. And I'll never forget, I saw the look on the CEO's face. He loved it, right? He was a big proponent of SWOT analysis. And I said, hey, you're already doing SWOT analysis. This allows you to do SWOT analysis better. I said, right now, your strengths and weaknesses are more internal to your company. And what I'm going to give you is marketplace strengths and weaknesses. And as soon as I said that, his eyes lit up, basically wrote me a check and said, get started tomorrow. I'm like, great, let's do this. And so IPA, using strengths and weaknesses, really ties well into like current frameworks, and because of that, I think it just gets adopted, and people want to do it more. But there are limitations, right? And by the way, too, I'm going to talk about limitations, but there are limitations in everything we do. Like we just came out of attribute importance, and I talked about all those techniques that suck, right? And their limitations. And our job as researchers, as a professor, my job is to come up with new and better ways to do things, right? So there are limitations, but there are limitations in most things that we undertake. So anyhow, what are the limitations of IPA? Those are crosshairs. Those are like the lines that separate the different quadrants, if you will. And what we find is that there's not like a hard science on the best way to where to put those lines. And if you talk to different people, they might use different ways to do it, okay? And so and what we're going to find is if we use a different way of putting the crosshairs in, it could give us a different answer. So let's take a look at that. So here's this IPA results, right? The major weaknesses, strengths, all those things. And you see that attribute in there. And that attribute right now with that crosshairs drawn the way they are, that attribute is a minor weakness. But let's say we use, instead of the midpoint, we use the mean attribute importance for the line. And all of a sudden, oh, I change where I put the crosshairs, and depending on where I do it, that attribute becomes either a major weakness or a minor weakness, and that's just because of where I put the crosshairs. So that's one of the complaints against IPA. Another limitation of IPA is that small changes can have a big impact. And what I mean by that is small changes in the attribute's score can lead to a big difference in how it's classified, okay? So, for example, if we have a line and the line separates an attribute importance at 7.5, and I have one attribute that is at 7.48, so now all of a sudden it's below that line, it's a minor classification, and the other one is 7.52, barely any difference, but now that small change has a big impact because it's now in the major category, right? And so it's similar to kind of where we draw those lines, but a small change in performance or importance can have a completely different classification, right? And so we look at this. Here's this attribute up in that. It's now a major weakness, and if we add 0.02, it could be a major strength, right? It just hops on the other side of that line like that. And so we can get, again, small differences can lead to major differences in classification, right? The other one, too, is what I would say a lack of precision. Let me give you two examples of this. You got attribute A and you got attribute B, right? And so attribute, there's not, from an importance standpoint, there's not that much difference. Attribute A is just a little bit more important. But you can see that attribute B, we suck at attribute B way more than attribute A, right? Like there's a big difference there. And so, but if you looked at the classification, you say, wow, you fix the major weaknesses first, attribute A should be fixed. And I could make a case that there's very little difference in importance, and because we're so much worse than attribute B that we should fix that, right? But it's that lack of precision. Let me show you another one. We've got two attributes. We've got attribute A and attribute B. Both are classified as major weaknesses, right? But it's obvious to see that attribute B is a much more extreme major weakness than attribute A, right? Because it's way worse in importance and it's much more important. But this classification would kind of put them in the same boat, so to speak. So these are some of the limitations. I face these limitations as a consultant, and we kind of we used IPA as a starting point, but we quickly deviated from that, and we tried to use logic and talking these things through because I knew of these limitations. But there is a solution, and the solution tries to take a little bit different look at this, and it's diagonal line IPA, right? And that's what we're talking about today. And diagonal line has a tendency to kind of help overcome some of those limitations that we talked about. Here's the best part. It's easy to do, right? In fact, when we used to do the combo chart, which we're not doing anymore, it was a lot of work, right? Because you had to go and completely start from scratch, and it was a different type of graph. This one, it's really easy to do, and it's really easy to interpret. Well, let me just show you. So diagonal, we start here with the old one, right? And we've got our graph, we've kind of gone through our interpretation of it, and now all we're going to do is like duplicate the graph, right? And we're going to put a diagonal line across it. It's that easy, right? And we'll probably have to take out those major classification things like that. But literally, we add a line to the graph, and there we go. So let's talk a little bit more above that. So diagonal line and how we look at this, I left the colors in there so you can kind of see it, but a couple things we need to talk about. So the first one is that the line, the crossbar line, or the crosshair line, if you would, on the importance, it needs to be, and it's really important that that line is attribute importance average, or the mean of the attribute importance. Now, when I've done standard IPA or the OG IPA, I sometimes would use average importance out of the average, and sometimes I would use the midpoint, right? And the midpoint would be like if the line went from 0 to 25, 12.5 is right in the middle. Both of those are acceptable, and those, they're good. However, when we use diagonal line IPA, it's really important that we use the attribute importance average as the line. So to be consistent with both of them, whenever we do IPA or whenever we do diagonal line IPA, that crosshair will be the attribute importance average. Okay. Now, in a video that you're going to see me do next in IPA, I may talk about the midpoint, so disregard that. Remember, it's attribute importance average. Okay, so now what we do is we look at different attributes and we say whatever's farthest above, that's the key word, above, farthest above the line, that would get priority to get improved, right? If it's on the line, we kind of say that it's optimal, right? Like it's got the optimal performance for the importance, and it might be I think they use the word satiated for if it's below the line, but it might like be overkill, right? So the key though, what we're going to focus on is the farthest above the line, the diagonal line, it would get the most priority to improve. Let me give you an example. So let's say we got this, and we've got attribute A, which in OG IPA would be a major strength. We've got attribute B, which in the OG IPA would be a major or a minor weakness. And then you've got D and C, which would be major weaknesses. Now, as we look at this, here's the first thing, and we'll talk about a precise way to kind of measure the distance. But you can see that diagonal, or the D, attribute D, is easily the farthest from that line, and so that would be our number one priority to fix. If we got out and measured it, A and B are pretty close, but A is just going to edge out B as far as distance from that line. A would be second, B would be the third priority to fix, and if we could afford it and had resources and time left over, then we'd fix C. But that's how this works. And it comes after that. Okay? Let me give you an example of this. This was when we did, in the past, we've used music streaming. So this was like Apple Music versus Spotify. And this was our IPA that we did, right? Importance on the vertical, relative performance ratios on here. You can see the major weakness, major strengths, all those different things. And you can see they use cool color coding to kind of designate, is it a strength or is it a weakness, using red, that sort of thing. So here, as I kind of alluded before, we use the midpoint importance score, right? We're going to change that. From now on, we're always going to use that line as the average importance, right? So I'm going to change the line. So check this out. The average here is like 7.7. And when we do that, because we change where that line, now accuracy, right? Accuracy was a minor weakness. Well, now it's a major weakness, okay? But now what we're going to do is, and so let's say we get done with this IPA, we've interpreted and we've got our stuff. Now we're simply going to copy that graph, and now we're going to add a diagonal line to do the diagonal line IPA. Now, here's one thing that I want you to keep in mind. Where did I put that line? Because where we put that line is super important. The first thing I want you to notice is that if you notice, that diagonal line crosses right where importance and performance kind of intersect, right? So it has to be there. And then what we do is that line starts in the lower left-hand corner, and then it shoots up at that angle. And sometimes it's a 30-degree angle or a 35 or 45, depending on the numbers. It's going to be an upward sloping diagonal line. In this case, I don't know what that angle is, but it looks to be about a 30-degree angle. Okay? So then what we would do is we would look at these attributes and say, okay, the furthest from that line is going to be overall value, ease of sharing, resolving problems, and then it looks like is it accuracy or additional services, right? Those are both pretty close. We can use mathematics to figure out distance and space, but that's like really hard to do and really complicated. I'm going to give you a super easy way to do it. I'm going to hop out of presentation mode. I'm going to highlight that diagonal line. And then on my keyboard, I have arrows that go up, left, right, or up or down. And I'm going to highlight that diagonal line, and I'm simply going to hit the up arrow, right? And I get up here and I say, okay, it's pretty easy to see that overall value is the furthest. And then we could bring this line down at that angle. Ease of sharing is number 2. Resolving problems, which is a major strength, is now number 3. And then we get here, and you can see these are just about the same. Accuracy edges it out by just a little bit, but you know, in my mind, I might kind of consider that almost the same, right? But that's how you do it. And those 5 attributes are above that diagonal line. That would be the order of how we determine that. Okay. Yeah. All right. So what I wanted to do is in this class we're going to do two graphs, 2 interpretations, and they'll will be different. And that's the key part, is that they give us a slightly different answers because we look at the problem from a slightly different perspective. But we'll do the original IPA, and then we'll also do the diagonal line IPA. All right, with no further ado, let's get to the next video, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do this graph in Excel. And by the way, business people love it. Fire up. Let's go.